This is the first episode in a two-part series, and the second story in a larger season. This season covers cases in New Mexico. All season, we're supporting the New Mexico nonprofit, Angels Voices Silence No More. Please be sure to listen through the end of the episode for information. This series discusses alleged intimate partner violence. If you're in need of resources, please reach out to 800-799-SAFE or thehotline.org. This is The Fall Line. On St. Patrick's Day 2001, 42-year-old Melissa Ann Montoya walked into the Apache House of Liquor in Dulce, New Mexico. It's a small town the New Yorker describes as, quote, near the headquarters of the Jicarilla Apache Nation. Melissa had been living in Colorado for a while, in what the Tri-City Record noted as, quote, a remote area, but it wasn't far from the New Mexico border. According to NBC, she'd recently returned to the Dulce area. According to Darlene Gomez, who'd grown up around Melissa, she was in the process of ending, quote, a tumultuous relationship with the man she'd lived with in Colorado. Melissa was a familiar face to the bar's patrons. She was an enrolled member of the Jicarilla Apache Nation, and she'd grown up with many of the patrons. Per NBC, it was a place that locals nicknamed the Zoo, and a structure that no longer stands today. Some of those gathered had grown up with Melissa. A friend of Melissa's, Ree Vicente, told NBC that she remembered speaking with her that night. Ree recalled, quote, I was asking her how she was doing, and we just started catching up. She wasn't acting like herself. She was kind of acting a little bit like something was bothering her. She had this look on her face like she was, worried. According to KOB4 TV, Ree was not the only person who noticed Melissa's worry. Quote, Montoya warned her family that something bad may happen to her. A number of those close to her described her relationship as allegedly abusive. That's reflected in NBC's and KOB4's reporting, and in our own interviews with those who knew Melissa. That night at the Apache House of Liquor in 2001 was the last time that Ree Vicente saw Melissa Montoya. It was the last time that anyone saw her, anyone who did not have ill intent. According to multiple news outlets, the same jurisdictional hurdles that frustrated Vanjie Randall Shorty were at play in Melissa's case, too. Melissa's residence was technically in Colorado, but she disappeared in New Mexico and on tribal land. A number of agencies have been involved over the years. According to Darlene Gomez, a New Mexico state police officer who'd long lived in Dulce worked to improve communication between the various agencies who, at one time or another, had participated in Melissa's case. Melissa has been missing for 23 years, and until recently, scant information has been available on her case. The news coverage that's come over the past few years has largely been thanks to local lawyer and advocate Darlene Gomez, who has worked more than a dozen pro bono missing and murdered Indigenous women and relatives cases across New Mexico. She's worked to get Melissa's relatives, like her younger cousin Melody Gomez, featured on local and even national news. Melissa's disappearance was the second case that Darlene took on, because she'd known Melissa almost all her life. But it certainly was not the last. Darlene now owns the law offices of Darlene Gomez in Albuquerque, where she practices in a number of areas, including, quote, Indian law. According to her website, that includes, quote, economic development on Indian land, tribal family matters, policies and procedures, family law, corporate law, and more. She's also general counsel for Medicine Wheel Ride, a nonprofit, and serves on the MMIWR task force for New Mexico. Darlene told the Tri-City Record that her, quote, advocacy work is rooted in a long-standing family tradition of helping those in need. Darlene told us that her family's been in the area for well more than a century, and they've been working for the community for nearly as long.
So Dulce and Lumberton, New Mexico are in the northwest portion of the state, so we're about, at some points, 2 or 3 miles away from the Colorado border. So it's just actually gorgeous, lots of pine trees and aspens. The elevation's probably about 6,700, just beautiful. We have all 4 seasons. We can have some really heavy winters. And then in the spring, we can have maybe 76-degree weather. and then we could drop down to below 5. I grew up in Lumberton, New Mexico, which is about 3 miles east of the Jicarilla Apache Nation. My family homesteaded the area in 1876 through the Homestead Act, and we also had some Spanish land grants in that area. So looking back at the stories that my great-grandmother and great-grandfather told, they were there when the Jicarilla Apache Indians were moved on foot, and it was in February. So my family recounts the fact that there was like feet of snow and they were just walking with just those blue wool blankets. And, a lot of them, their shoes were not even shoes anymore. They were being held together with different like bark, and how devastating it was to just watch what the federal government was doing to the Native Americans. And so since that day in February of 1886, 10 years after my family homesteaded, we've just had this close connection. And it's always been our community where in the beginning, my family basically had an open kitchen and did a lot of the feeding for the Jicarilla Apache who were in the area to make sure that they would survive the winter, and also teaching them about the different medicines that we use through plants. And we used to can quite a bit of vegetables and fruits. And then we always had jerky, a lot of elk and deer jerky. So dried meat was big in our life. We also had quite a bit of sheep. So really it was just trying to teach the Jicarillas how to survive in that area. And then, we were taught so much more from the Jicarillas as well. So it was just a partnership since 1886, which, I just feel like I continue today. And I have a 12-year-old son, and that's his community as well.
Per the New Yorker, and as Darlene said, when the Jicarilla Apache Reservation was established in 1887, the Gomez Ranch was already on that land, and their family kept their property. So, as the New Yorker explained, it, quote, exists as a pocket of New Mexico within the reservation. And that's still the case today.
So the community is very small. The community of Dulce is about, I would say, 3,400. Lumberton, where I live at, is about 100 people who live there. And then about 30 miles to the east, there's a lot of small little communities of, maybe 300 or 400 people. Probably about 95% Native American and about 5% Hispanic. But growing up, we were all one type of people. It was not like, oh, you're Hispanic and they're Indian. So it was just very much a community that helped one another.
Darlene had deep connections to Melissa Montoya. It wasn't just that they lived in a small community. Their family has layered ties.
I've known her since I was a little baby because our families were friends, and we also share the same aunt. So a lot of her family members called her Lisa. A lot of people called her Melissa. She was older than me. She was a couple years younger than my brother. And so her and her parents used to come to my family's home for like coffee and different things like that. But my parents also owned a 7-Eleven. And so I would see her quite often in my parents' 7-Eleven. She was mostly one of those people that you're always like, you kind of look up to. And for me, I always had a very tomboy haircut, and I wore cowboy boots and, these little silk shirts with cows and horses on them because, we're from a community that there's a lot of ranching. And I always used to think she was so beautiful. So I would always be like, oh, your hair is so pretty. And I always thought she was like a princess or something. So that was our relationship, where she would come and just kind of talk with our parents. And I would like show her around, like, this is my dog. And then as I got older, I always admired how beautiful she was. She always used to have like these almost like colored pearls that she wore often that were like gray and pink. And I think in one of the last pictures, she's wearing those. And she just had these beautiful high cheekbones, and she had these beautiful doe eyes and really pretty skin, and she had like this slight gap in her teeth. She was taller and just, really, really pretty.
Looking back, Darlene thinks that she had some hero worship for Melissa. Maybe she was the kind of young woman that Darlene imagined being when she got older. She loved to talk to her and ask her questions about everything, what she liked, her clothes, her jewelry, and to show Melissa things that she cared about too. We've probably all been that kid with someone that we admired.
I think she was kind of quiet, but I think it was because I was so overwhelming, always like talking and asking questions. So I think I embarrassed her a little bit. But in the community with my brother and his friends and her brothers, she was really strong-willed, strong personality, because oftentimes when you grow up in small communities like we do, she grew up in a house that I think for a lot of the years didn't have running water or electricity. So they had to haul water from the river, which was near their house. And, it's just a really hard life. And then she came from a community where she was considered a half breed because she was half Jicarilla Apache and half Hispanic. So that also kind of plays how you're treated in the community. So I think that also being from a poor family, that she had to be tough. I think most definitely like outgoing, definitely someone who stood up for what was right. And like I said, you have to be kind of outspoken and tough to just grow up with a bunch of boys and just in the environment we grew up with. But she would have to stand on her own 2 feet. She was a tough girl that could chop wood and take care of duties around the house, outdoors, and just a person that you could probably always count on to help you. So that's how I would describe her.
We also spoke to Melody Gomez, who was Melissa's much younger cousin. She was barely out of adolescence when Melissa disappeared. It was the first time she was aware of someone going missing in her community, but not the last.
So I live in a very small community, and with the population size, I know 4 people that are missing right now. And to me, that's a big number for the size of the population of town that I live in. I should not know personally 4 people who are missing. And then if you talk to family members or if you read articles, they're very super vague. They're super small. It doesn't look like there was a lot of effort put into an investigation, or it's disheartening because you have mothers whose children or daughters have been missing for 30, 40 years. Like, at least if someone passes away, they're not coming back. You know that you have that closure. But when someone goes missing, I think you probably spend part of your life constantly looking over your shoulder and looking in large crowds to see if there's a possibility that your loved one might be there. And that's a very difficult way to live.
Melody's known that feeling since she was a young woman. She and Melissa did not grow up together. Melissa was an adult when Melody was born. Unlike Darlene, she didn't spend a lot of time with Melissa when she was a child.
So her and I have a huge age difference. We're probably 22 plus years age difference. And so my grandmother is actually sisters to her father. So in the cultural sense, she would kind of be considered my aunt. They grew up on a remote part of the Jicarilla Apache Reservation. They lived kind of in a remote area where I think possibly growing up, they may not have had access to like running water, electricity. So it wasn't in town. I actually didn't know her growing up. I knew her more as an adult because I was closer in age to her nieces and nephews. And so that's where I got to know her more later on. She was tall and slender and had a beautiful smile. And she reminded me a lot of my dad's sisters, my aunts. They kind of resembled each other. She was absolutely beautiful. Every time you would see her, she would have a big, huge smile on her face and she would greet you and hug you. And she was just very, very outgoing. Just had a beautiful soul.
We told you that Melissa had grown up in Dulce. That's where her friends and family lived. After she began to date the man she was in a relationship with up until the time of her disappearance, she moved about 30 minutes away to Colorado. It was during that time, when Melissa was in her early 40s, that she and Melody actually spent one-on-one time together. That's when Melody got to see Melissa's relationship with her boyfriend up close. He has never been named in the media, but Darlene Gomez described him to KOB4 as, quote, a non-tribal member who Melissa had been in a relationship with for, quote, quite a long time.
In my late teenage years, maybe 19, closer to 20, somewhere around that age, she lived on a county road that connected New Mexico to Colorado. And so the people that live in our small communities use that road quite often to go into Colorado to do shopping and stuff. And so I remember going to her house that she shared with her boyfriend or fiance. And she was always just very welcoming. We would drive up, they would come out. Of course, they wouldn't just invite everybody in. And eventually I think he got comfortable, her boyfriend got comfortable enough with me to where they started allowing me to go inside the house. And so when we'd go inside the house, she was very hospitable. Do you guys want coffee, Kool-Aid, cookies? Whatever she had, she would offer to share. And we were both young. My relative that I would go visit her with, we were both around the same age, late teens. So I do remember going to her house and visiting her, not for long periods of time. I think more so to kind of just check on her. I didn't realize that at the time, but I think that's what the motive was. So when she was with her boyfriend, she wasn't as willing to talk and wasn't so willing to, or she kept the conversations very short. Depending on who you were, he would maybe allow her to say a quick greeting, and then they would quickly get in the vehicle and leave, that kind of thing. But eventually it got to where he would greet me and she would greet me and we would talk for a little bit if we met up in public. But I know a lot of people didn't have that kind of maybe interaction with him because he didn't allow it. I didn't maybe understand that whole bit because I was young and naive and hadn't been in relationships like that or any at all. But I would see, and it concerned me that he was so controlling. Like I remember one time we were there and she was talking, I guess, too much. And she was too nice and too hospitable. And so he was very quick to kind of cut her off mid-sentence to what she was talking. And so she kind of just went into like a reclusive behavior and just sat there very passive and didn't say anything after that. So I could tell that he controlled her actions. And so that kind of concerned me because I'm not used to that behavior at all. So I knew that that was concerning. It scared me because my parents are not that way. My father never treated my mother that way. Growing up, we were allowed to be very vocal and express ourselves and speak and interact with people.
In an interview with NBC, Melody recalled one incident in particular that disturbed her. She said that while she did not observe, quote, Melissa's boyfriend abuse her physically, his extreme reaction to Melody's visit frightened her. She told NBC that she and her cousin had been laughing together and Melissa's boyfriend had, quote, intervened to stop their fun. It wasn't only that he'd silenced them, though. It was Melissa's reaction to his appearance. Melody said that Melissa, quote, shrank back and she immediately kind of had like a reclusive behavior and kind of just stood back. I felt the tension. I felt bad. I kind of got a little scared. After that, I knew that when her and I interacted in front of him, it had to just be in a certain manner. Darlene Gomez, who also knew Melissa and her family well, told us she thought that many people were concerned about Melissa at that time, especially because she was relatively isolated over the border in Colorado.
everyone she came into contact with that she was close to had numerous stories about how it just was getting worse and worse, and that she was in fear for her life and for her safety. I think one of the things that I think about when I also think that sometimes I felt like she was shy when she used to come in with previous boyfriends. I don't know if she had a pattern of being in relationships where there was domestic violence, but I know in her last relationship, her boyfriend very much isolated her from the family and isolated her from her friends. And I think that no matter how strong you are as a woman, that men can also be much, much stronger. And they're also very much can emotionally abuse you to think that you're not strong enough to do anything, that you don't have any other options. She had told some family members that she wanted to end the relationship. But then I know the night that she went missing, her boyfriend had been at the bar and had kind of been pestering her in a way, because we got reports from people that were at this dance that he was like sitting close to her and making her really uncomfortable. And then she would move somewhere else and then he would kind of follow her.
Darlene thinks that the lack of resources made it difficult for Melissa. In 2020, the NIWRC, that's the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center Incorporated, found that there were, quote, approximately 55 shelters for Native women in the entire United States. Further, they found that, quote, the number of Native shelters is connected to the lack of adequate federal funding. It's also connected to the lack of tribal infrastructure, including staff to apply for grant funds to create and maintain a shelter. Some tribes have staff to write grants, while many do not. Tribes just do not have the staff to write the applications to access the funding for a shelter. A third issue is finding staff, either survivors or survivors of a close relative, that understand the need for the shelter program and has the wherewithal to put it together. In small villages, for example, the amount of money it takes to run a shelter is expensive and difficult. And in many tribes, it goes back to having a building available for a shelter, end quote. Women who are living on reservations may be many miles, maybe hundreds of miles, away from established shelters. The Resource Center also pointed out the need for shelters that address the specific needs of Indigenous women, no matter where they live, urban or rural, on or off reservation, and flexible funding to go with it, quote, because each tribe is different, and the healing journey for Native women varies. Considering that the latest reports from the Association of American Indian Affairs show that, quote, 83% of American Indian and Alaska Native women have experienced violence in their lifetime, the lack of structural support for those facing intimate partner violence is not just alarming, it's a massive failure.
The fact that for her to go somewhere on the reservation, there was not any domestic violence shelters, and there was very little help with domestic violence in general in those years. And she also didn't have a vehicle, so, you're thinking about the nearest town is from their ranch was probably about 35 to 40 minutes away, and that's a predominantly Anglo community that really was not real open to outsiders per se, different races. And then also on the reservation, there was no housing for single women. So she didn't really have a whole lot of options to go places. I know that family had asked her if she wanted to, stay with them, but she never wanted to impose. And I also think that she thought by staying with another family member, she would be putting them in danger.
It struck Melody how differently Melissa acted when she was away from that house in Colorado and with her family or friends. It was something that was even more evident in the spring of 2001, before Melissa disappeared. Melody remembers seeing Melissa back in Dulce. She also remembers Melissa having a vehicle then, and new independence.
When you grow up in communities where there's no resources for housing, for treatment centers, for anything, I can see now why people stay in certain situations, because maybe one of two options. You stay in an abusive relationship where you have a roof over your head, or you may become homeless, you know? And so there's not a lot of resources in these small communities. And so I think oftentimes people do what they have to do to survive. She was fun. I remember one memory in particular. I was driving home from Farmington, and it was funny because in such a small town that we live in, we both had very, very distinct vehicles. So I had this little purple SUV, and she drove this orange truck with a camper. And so we ran into each other kind of in the middle of nowhere and realized it was each other. So we stopped and pulled over on the side of the road. And she was just so excited. She says, "I'm finally single. I'm going to start going to visit you at your house," and stuff like that. And that was pretty close up to the time to maybe within a couple of months before she went missing. But then I think there was a period of where she went back. So she went back with him, and I hadn't seen her for a couple of months. And then when I seen her the night that she went missing, I was very excited to see her because I hadn't seen her for those few months. And so when I seen her that night, I was excited for her because she wanted to go to the dance and have a good time, and she looked very nice.
That good time Melody mentions, it was St. Patrick's Day 2001, the night that Melissa headed out to the bar. She was dressed in jeans and boots. Melody remembers seeing her at the Apache House of Liquor that evening and thinking that her cousin looked especially pretty and happy. But some friends reported that that wasn't the mood the whole night. According to NBC, another friend of Melissa's, Ree, saw her later in the night, and her mood had shifted. Ree recalled that, quote, "She wasn't acting like herself. She was kind of acting a little bit like something was bothering her. She had this look on her face like she was worried." According to our interviews, Melissa was allegedly seen speaking with a man that night, someone believed to be her ex-partner. There was some tension or conflict, and allegedly, when she left that night, he followed soon after. As far as Darlene and Melody know, that was the last time that Melissa was ever seen. But it was not something that was immediately known to her family. Melissa was an adult woman, and she'd been back and forth between her place in Colorado with her ex-boyfriend and with relatives and friends back in the Dulce area. She was not in the habit of everyday contact. In fact, weeks passed before they knew that something was wrong, and then it took longer for extended family to find out. All factors that may have slowed down the tracing of vital clues. This wasn't just a time before many people had cell phones. Regular telephone service could be an issue for some too, especially in this rural area where the federal government never provided infrastructure to begin with. And Melissa's family questioned whether she was always allowed access in the first place. Melody said that it was probably late spring or even summer when she realized that something had gone very, very wrong with her cousin.
So it wasn't for a few months, actually, because I had seen her the evening that she went missing. I didn't even realize she was missing, and a lot of the family, I don't think, realized she was missing. I hear stories now that one of my aunts was maybe one of the first people to realize that she was missing because my aunt worked at a very centralized business in town where there was a hotel and a restaurant and stuff. And so she saw a lot of people daily. And I think she was one of the first people to notice, hey, we haven't seen Lisa, and it was cyclical. And so there was certain times that she would go visit my aunt, which was like a per capita Friday.
A per capita payment would be Melissa's portion of earnings from the nation's holdings.
And so my aunt knew that she would be there very early in the morning, and she would visit with her until the check place opened up for her to go and pick up her check. And so after the first time, the second time, then it was kind of like, wait a minute, this is her pattern and she's done this for years and she hasn't done this for a few months. So that was the concern, because I do think that there was extended periods of time where he didn't allow her to interact with a lot of people. And so it was not uncommon for her to go several weeks, maybe a month or two without people seeing her. And so when I think I ran into her sister is when I really felt like kind of the impact, because she was very emotional and just saying that they hadn't seen Melissa, they hadn't seen her, if we had seen her, if any of our friends had heard anything like that. And just her emotion and her reaction was kind of when I really realized that it was serious and she might not be coming back.
For Darlene Gomez, the news came through family too, her mother.
My mom called me, and she called me just in those days, everybody kind of used that phone that was connected to the wall. And she had called me with some of Melissa's family members and had told me that she was missing and they wanted to know what they could do.
When you first heard your mom tell you, did you have a sense that this was going to be a very serious situation?
Yeah, I knew that the possibilities of her just going somewhere else were very, very minimal. She didn't have any kind of prior history of just leaving the community and not telling people where she was going, or she didn't really even leave the community. She stayed within the area.
When that call came, Darlene was in law school. She'd been attending the University of New Mexico Law School, and she'd already worked on one MMIWR case while interning with a law firm. According to KRQE, that case was the murder of Betty Lee. Betty, a mother of 5, was attacked and killed by the serial killer Robert Fry after she was stranded without a ride. Fry was convicted of her murder in 2000. Melissa's family needed Darlene's help because of her knowledge of the law and of law enforcement. Those jurisdictional issues that we mentioned at the top of the episode, they were looming. And Darlene, a second-year law student, set out to do her best to help. It was a step that would shape the rest of her career path, one of advocacy. At the time of Melissa Montoya's disappearance, she was 42 years old. She was reported to be 5'7" and between 155 and 165 pounds. Melissa was last seen wearing brown boots and blue jeans. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Melissa Ann Montoya, please contact the Jicarilla Apache Nation Police Department at 575-759-3222 or the Bureau of Indian Affairs Jicarilla Agency at 575-759-3951. Next time on The Fall Line, the search for Melissa Montoya and the roadblocks faced even when the game-changing systems, like NamUs, became a possibility, and how unidentified remains found in the desert became a possible lead in her case. If you know of a case that should be covered on The Fall Line, there's a link to our case submission form in the show notes. Thank you for listening. This season, we're supporting Angels Voices Silence No More, a New Mexico-based nonprofit founded by our friend Eric Carter Londine, the brother of Jacob Londine. According to their mission statement, AVS&M's goal is to, quote, empower families by providing them with the necessary resources and referrals to advocate for their missing or murdered loved ones. We believe in taking a comprehensive approach to support, encompassing a wide range of services including billboards, DNA testing, private investigation, funeral expenses, therapy, and much more. Our goal is to ensure that no family faces these challenges alone. Fall Line listeners can join us in donating to that mission. If you can't donate right now, that's okay. Sharing their charitable initiatives would be a huge help. Find all the relevant links in our show notes. The Fall Line is an independent podcast, and we appreciate listener support. It allows us to do research, obtain FOIA, pay our content advisors, and support and donate to the causes we care about. If you try out the products we advertise, please use our sponsor codes. It really helps. And please, take a moment to rate and review our show in your podcast app of choice. My book, Lay Them to Rest, which covers years of my life working on a Jane Doe case and the world of forensic scientists who resolve unidentified person cases, is out everywhere as hardcover, ebook, and audiobook, read by me. You can order it anywhere you get books and through your local library. Find out more through the link in our show notes. And if you'd like to support the show and the stories we cover, join us on Apple Premium or Patreon. 100% of our Patreon and Apple Premium earnings are supporting our Family Therapy Fund and actively paying for therapy for families who've appeared on the show. On Patreon, you can get early release, ad-free versions of our regular episodes for $5 a month. If you prefer Apple Premium, you can subscribe there as well. On Patreon, we also post occasional giveaways, updates, and blogs, which all patrons can enjoy, starting at just $1. The Fall Line is written, hosted, and researched by Laura Norton. Interviews by Brooke Hargrove, produced, engineered, and scored by Maura Curry. Content advisement by Brandy C. Williams and Vic Kennedy. And, as always, our most special thanks to Liz Lipka.